It all started with a box of old photographs. Not mine, you understand. They belonged to my grandfather, a man who had collected moments like some people collect stamps, each one carefully preserved behind a thin sheet of cellophane. After he passed, the task of sorting through his life's collection fell to me. I was 22, adrift in that particular way you can be after college, and spending my days in the dusty quiet of his attic felt more meaningful than anything else I could think of doing. Most of the pictures were what you'd expect. Grainy black and white images of stern-faced relatives I'd never met, blurry birthday parties from the 70s, my own gap-toothed school photos. But then I found it. Tucked into the back of a leather-bound album, a single loose photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, probably taken sometime in the late 60s if the style of her dress was anything to go by. She was standing on a windswept beach, her dark hair caught in mid-flight by the wind, a laugh just beginning to bloom on her face. She wasn't looking at the camera, but at someone just out of frame, and the look in her eyes, it was one of pure, unadulterated joy. There was a handwritten note on the back, the ink faded but still legible. Eleonora, June 1968. Before she knew. Before she knew what? The question hooked into me and wouldn't let go. I asked my grandmother about her, but she just shook her head, a sad, distant look clouding her eyes. That was a long time ago, was all she would say. The mystery of Eleonora became my obsession. I spent the next few weeks piecing together clues from my grandfather's journals, letters, and the other photographs. He had met her during a summer trip to the coast, a whirlwind romance that, from his writings, seemed to be the defining love of his youth. His journal entries were filled with her. "Eleonora smells of the sea and cinnamon," he wrote in one. "She argues about poetry as fiercely as she kisses." And then a final, heartbreaking entry from the end of that summer. "She is gone, and I am left with only the echo of her laughter." There was no explanation for her disappearance, no mention of a fight or a farewell. It was as if she had simply vanished from his life. But I had found one more clue, a small folded receipt from a bookstore in a coastal town called Port Blossom. It was dated the same week as that final journal entry. I knew it was a long shot, a wild goose chase fueled by a romantic notion and a lot of free time, but I had to know what happened. I packed a small bag, tucked the photograph of the laughing girl in my pocket, and drove the 5 hours to Port Blossom, a place I'd never even heard of until that week. The town was small, smelling of salt and fried fish, with narrow streets and buildings weathered by the sea air. The bookstore was still there, a quaint little shop with a faded blue awning and a bell that jingled when I opened the door. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a cascade of white hair looked up from behind the counter. I felt a surge of nervous energy, the photograph feeling heavy in my pocket. I walked up to the counter, my heart thumping a ridiculously frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Excuse me," I began, my voice sounding strained. "I'm looking for someone. Her name was Eleonora?" The woman's smile didn't falter, but a knowing light sparked in her eyes. "Eleonora," she repeated, her voice soft. "You're not the first to come looking for that story." She then leaned forward slightly, her gaze drifting toward the back of the shop. "You should talk to my granddaughter," she said. "She's the keeper of the stories around here." And that's when I saw her, emerging between two towering shelves of books, a young woman with the same dark flyaway hair and a laugh that, even from across the room, I knew I recognized. It was the same laugh from the photograph, the one that had started this whole journey. She looked at me, a question in her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.
Her name was Clara, and as she walked towards me, the resemblance to the woman in the photograph was uncanny. It was in the thoughtful way she tilted her head, the deep, intelligent brown of her eyes. The laughter I had heard was quieter now, replaced by a look of gentle curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as warm as the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty bookshop windows. My own voice seemed to have abandoned me. I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the faded photograph, the edges softened by a half-century of waiting. I held it out to her. "My grandfather took this picture," I said, the words feeling clumsy, "of a woman named Eleonora. Your grandmother told me you might know the story." Clara took the photograph, her fingers tracing the image as if it were a delicate artifact. A sad, knowing smile touched her lips, the same smile I had seen on her grandmother, the bookstore owner. "Ah, you must be Thomas's grandson." Hearing my grandfather's name on her lips was a jolt, like hearing a character from a novel speak your own name. "Yes," I said. He never said what happened." "He wouldn't have known," she said softly, looking up from the picture. Her gaze was direct, holding a depth of understanding that made me feel like she wasn't just seeing me, but the ghost of the young man who had followed my grandfather's footsteps here. "My grandmother, Eleonora, she spoke of him often. The summer artist with kind eyes and a laugh that could rival the gulls." She led me to a small nook in the back of the store, a pair of worn armchairs nestled between shelves of poetry. For the next hour, as the sun began its slow descent, Clara filled in the other half of the story. Her grandmother, Eleonora, hadn't been on vacation that summer. She'd been sent to Port Blossom to stay with an aunt, to have a final season of freedom before returning home to a life that had already been decided for her. An arranged engagement to a man she didn't love, a path set in stone by family obligation and expectations. "That's what the picture means," Clara explained, her eyes fixed on the image of her grandmother laughing. "Before she knew. Your grandfather took that picture the day before the letter from her parents arrived, the one summoning her home immediately. She never got to say goodbye to him. Her aunt told her it was for the best, to make a clean break. She was heartbroken. So there it was. No dramatic fight, no mysterious disappearance, just the quiet, brutal reality of circumstance. My grandfather had been left with the echo of her laughter, and she had been left with the memory of a summer that was never meant to last. She married him," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "The other man. She had a family, a life, but she never forgot Thomas. She kept every sketch she ever drew of her. She said it was like keeping a small piece of the person she might have been." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their story settling between us. It felt both complete and desperately unfinished. The afternoon light had turned to a soft golden glow, and through the window I could hear the distant cry of the sea. "Come on," Clara said, standing up abruptly. "I want to show you something." She led me out of the bookstore and down the cobbled street towards the sound of the waves. We walked onto the beach, the same stretch of sand from the photograph. The wind was picking up, just as it had been that day in 1968, and it caught in Clara's dark hair, whipping it across her face.
She stopped and turned to face me, the setting sun catching the light in her eyes. "My grandmother always regretted not being able to explain," she said. "She felt like she had just vanished, leaving him to think the worst, that maybe he'd imagined it all, or that she hadn't cared." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, yellowed envelope. It was sealed, and on the front, in the same faded ink as the note on the back of my photograph, was my grandfather's name. "She wrote this for him the day she left," Clara said, holding it out to me. but she never had the courage to send it. She gave it to me before she passed away and told me that if his story ever came looking for hers, I should give it back. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age, and felt as fragile as a dried leaf in my hands. The setting sun cast long shadows on the sand, and the only sounds were the rhythmic wash of the waves and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Clara stood a few feet away, giving me space, her silhouette framed against the brilliant orange and purple of the sky. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal, a seal that had held its secret for over 50 years. The ink inside was the same faded blue-black ink as the note on the photograph, the handwriting a delicate looping script. "My dearest Thomas," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have failed. It means I did not find the courage to tell you this to your face, and for that I am a coward. There is no easy way to say this, so I will just say it. I have to go home. My life, it seems, is not my own. There is a path I am expected to walk, and it does not lead back to you. This summer with you has been a stolen season, a chapter I will read over and over again in my mind for the rest of my days. You have shown me what it is to feel truly seen. When you look at me, I am not just a daughter or a future wife. I am Eleonora. You argue with me about poetry and laugh at my terrible jokes. You see the fire in me, not just the hearth. They are calling me home to a life of quiet duty. I am supposed to forget the smell of the sea and the feel of your hand in mine. I am supposed to forget the sound of your laughter. I will do as I am told. I will walk the path they have laid for me, but I want you to know, in case you ever doubt it, that what we had was real. It was the realest thing in my life. Do not think for a moment that I did not love you. I loved you with everything I was in this brief, sun-drenched time we were given. Perhaps in another life, on another shore, it might have been enough. Forever yours in the way that matters, Eleonora." I read it twice, the words blurring together through the film of tears that had gathered in my eyes. All the anger and confusion I'd felt on my grandfather's behalf simply evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for them both. For two young people caught in the gears of a world that didn't have room for their love. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. When I looked up, the first stars were beginning to prick the darkening sky. Clara hadn't moved. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for sharing this with me." "It wasn't mine to keep," she replied, walking back towards me. "It was always his, or his stories at least." We stood in a comfortable silence for a long time, watching the tide creep closer to our feet. The story of Thomas and Eleonora was finally complete, a perfect tragic circle, and here we were, two strangers standing in its center. "It's funny," I said, breaking the quiet. "I came here looking for an ending to his story. I didn't expect to find, well, this." "A beginning?" suggested Clara, with a small smile on her lips. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just know that my whole life I felt like I'm reading a book someone else started, following a map someone else drew. This is the first time I feel like I found a place that isn't on the map." We started walking down the beach, the sand cool beneath our feet as night settled in. We talked for hours. I told her about my grandfather, about feeling lost after college, and the dusty attic that had somehow led me here. She told me about growing up in Port Blossom, her love for the old bookstore, and her dream of traveling to all the places she had only ever read about. She was the keeper of stories, but she longed to have a few of her own. We had inherited a story of a love that was cut short, of a goodbye that was never said. But as we walked and talked under a sky full of stars, I felt a new story taking shape, a quiet and uncertain one, written not in faded ink, but in the shared space between us. My original plan had been to drive back home in the morning, to place the letter with my grandfather's things and close that chapter for good. But as Clara laughed at one of my own terrible jokes, her face illuminated by the distant lights of the pier, I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. I think, I said, stopping and turning to face her, I think I might stay a little longer. A little longer turned into the rest of the summer. I rented a small room above the bakery down the street, the scent of fresh bread waking me each morning instead of the city traffic I was used to. My days found a new gentle rhythm, measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the ebb and flow of the tide and the quiet hum of the bookstore. Clara and I were inseparable. Our story wasn't a whirlwind romance like our grandparents'. It was a slow, quiet build, like a friendship catching fire. We spent our days sorting through dusty new arrivals at the shop, our hands brushing as we reached for the same forgotten classic. She taught me the town's secrets, the best place to watch the fishing boats come in, the hidden cove where the seals gathered at low tide, the old woman on the edge of town who told the most scandalous stories. In return, I told her about my life, my grandfather, and the feeling of being adrift that had now somehow vanished. We were conscious of the echo we were living in, the ghost of that other summer romance that had started it all. But ours was different. Theirs was a stolen season, beautiful but fleeting, lived under the shadow of an ending they couldn't control. Ours was a chosen season. We were not bound by duty or expectation. We were simply two people who had found each other through a story and decided to start writing our own. One evening in late August, as the air began to carry the first crisp hint of autumn, we found ourselves on that same stretch of beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the same brilliant hues it had on my first day there. I had the old photograph in my wallet, and Clara had her grandmother's unsent letter tucked away in a box of treasures. We didn't need them anymore. Their story was a part of us, the foundation on which we were building, but it no longer defined us. My grandfather spent his whole life wondering about an ending, I said, watching the waves erase our footprints from the sand. He never knew that his story didn't actually end here. It just paused. Clara leaned her head on my shoulder, her dark hair catching the last of the light. I used to think of my grandmother's story as a sad one, she said softly. A story about what could have been, but now I think it was a love story so strong it just needed a second chance to get it right. We stood there in silence, a comfortable, perfect quiet. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic pronouncements. There didn't need to be. It was all there in the shared silence, in the easy way her hand found mine. I wasn't the lost young man sorting through a dead man's memories anymore. I was home. The next week, I drove back to the city, but only to pack my things. I gave away my furniture, ended the lease on my apartment, and said my goodbyes. When I returned to Port Blossom, it wasn't as a visitor searching for a story. It was to begin a new chapter. Sometimes, late at night when the bookstore is quiet and Clara is asleep with her head in my lap, I take out that faded photograph of Eleonora. I look at her laughing face, a moment of pure joy captured before circumstance changed everything. I am so grateful my grandfather kept it, this small paper key that unlocked the past. He came here looking for love and found a memory. I came here looking for a memory and found my life. Her story had come looking for his, and in the space between, they had left just enough room for ours.